No More Room in Hell's zombie apocalypse is driven by the 732ZH virus, also called encephalitis lethargica, based on a real, extinct virus that affected the world from 1917 to 1928, creating a pandemic that overwhelms humanity with classic Romero-style undead that require complete brain destruction to be permanently killed. Another time when the government tried to downplay the severity and spread, while no research team or agency was able to figure out how to suppress the virus. Heavily inspired by George A. Romero's Living Dead series, with the title referencing Dawn of the Dead's iconic line, "When there's no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth." The game forces players into brutal survival scenarios where infection spreads through bites, scratches, or contaminated water, and victims must take phalanx pills to delay inevitable death and reanimation. What sets No More Room in Hell apart from other zombie games is its unflinching commitment to realism, including the controversial decision to feature zombie children that behave like fast-moving runners. Since release, complaints about child zombies prompted an official 2013 developer statement declaring, "We will not be removing them. They are a core component of our game design and our design philosophy," with developers explaining that their goal was to create a zombie game not based on killing and action, but on tension and fear. So basically, go cry about it. The virus uniquely reanimates the entire brain rather than specific parts, making these zombies retain disturbing human-like qualities while being driven purely by hunger, creating encounters that feel genuinely tragic rather than simply action-packed. No More Room in Hell proves that sometimes the most effective horror comes from refusing to sanitize the apocalypse, forcing players to confront uncomfortable truths about the government's failure to take action and how they all failed the world. Happiness transforms the zombie apocalypse into claustrophobic social commentary by trapping residents in a luxury apartment building when the failed pneumonia treatment drug called Next causes a worldwide pandemic known as the Lyta virus, aka mad person disease. Those infected by Lyta experience short bouts of insanity and bloodlust before completely regressing into a zombie-like state, with the virus spreading through bites or saliva while causing madness, loss of morale, and an insatiable thirst for blood. This was an interesting take on the zombies you typically see, because they generally were in this state for a couple of hours a day and had no recollection of what they did, which is kind of insane. The genius lies in how the series uses the apartment building quarantine as a pressure cooker for human nature, forcing diverse residents to confront their prejudices and survival instincts while civil rights groups protest against military containment measures, believing the infected are still capable of normal human interaction. The series weaponizes pandemic anxiety by using the fear of the coronavirus pandemic as a backdrop to create a new virus, making every cough and scratch feel like a death sentence in a world where infection means losing your humanity. Each episode becomes a twisted social experiment where neighbors turn against each other faster than the virus can spread. Happiness proves that sometimes the real monsters aren't the infected, but the people who reveal their true nature when civilization's safety net disappears. Cooties delivers one of the most disturbing horror comedy premises ever. A chicken infected with a mutant virus gets processed into contaminated chicken nuggets at Fort Chicken Elementary School, turning innocent grade school kids into a feral swarm of massive savages that hunt their teachers for dinner. The outbreak begins when bully student Shelly Linker eats one of the tainted black dotted nuggets, green goo and all, then bites her tormentor Patriot during class, causing a food-borne virus that rots children's brains and transforms fewer than 90 elementary students into zombie-like cannibals. This 2014 nightmare weaponizes every parent's worst fear about school lunch programs while forcing a desperate group of teachers led by aspiring horror writer Clint Hadson, played by Elijah Wood, to survive against their own students in a twisted game of cat and mouse. Every classroom rule gets flipped when the very kids teachers are supposed to protect become their bloodthirsty hunters. The opening credits sequence showing the step-by-step nugget creation process will make you never look at processed chicken the same way, while the climatic gasoline fire scene where the infected children burn alive proves that sometimes the most effective horror comes from corrupting childhood innocence. Cooties transforms the everyday school cafeteria into ground zero for humanity's most unthinkable nightmare, where lunch literally becomes a matter of life and death. Cabanari of the Iron Fortress absolutely demolishes the zombie playbook by throwing us into a steampunk fever dream where the Industrial Revolution meets apocalyptic chaos. This isn't your basic zombie outbreak. We're talking about Cabinet, literal corpses with iron-plated hearts that can only be destroyed by piercing their metallic core, forcing humanity to bunker down in fortress train stations connected by badass armored steam locomotives. The virus spreads through bites and blood contact like wildfire, nearly catapulting humanity into extinction and forcing survivors to establish isolated, fortified cities where steam trains become literal lifelines between stations. Here's where it gets absolutely unhinged. Engineer Ikuma becomes infected while testing his prototype steam gun and transforms into a rare Cabanari, a hybrid being who keeps his human consciousness while gaining superhuman abilities. This man literally said, "Fine, I'll evolve myself," and became humanity's desperate answer to their own extinction. The general population sees Cabinet as cursed supernatural beings, but research reveals they're actually virus-infected hosts, making every train journey a high-stakes speed run through zombie-infested wastelands where steam-powered technology becomes humanity's only play against the undead apocalypse. Red Dead Redemption Undead Nightmare said "hold my beer" and transforms the Wild West into an absolute supernatural nightmare when Abraham Reyes makes the fatal mistake of stealing an ancient Aztec mask from sacred tombs, unleashing a zombie plague across the American frontier that ironically turns him into the undead himself. This highly infectious undead plague spreads across the frontier with devastating speed, forcing John Marston to desperately search for a cure while early signs in Blackwater warn to close the borders. Rockstar completely flipped their realistic Western formula on its head, combining cowboys with zombies while somehow maintaining the series' signature storytelling depth, moral complexity, and badass gunplay, creating a genre-bending masterpiece that shouldn't work but absolutely does. The plague can only be stopped when John ventures into the cursed tombs and returns the stolen Aztec mask to its original resting place, because some artifacts come with consequences that extend far beyond the grave. This DLC proves that even in the lawless frontier, there are some lines that shouldn't be crossed, and some ancient powers that should never be disturbed. The Blacklight Virus in Prototype represents evolution weaponized, transforming its host Alex Mercer into a shape-shifting predator capable of consuming and perfectly mimicking anyone he touches. Unlike traditional zombie infections, Blacklight doesn't create mindless undead, but rather grants horrific abilities, including superhuman strength, regeneration, and the power to absorb memories and identities from victims. The virus originated as a military bioweapon designed by Gentek Corporation, but when Alex Mercer was cornered by Blackwatch in Penn Station, he shattered the vial and released the virus onto the unsuspecting city as his final act of defiance. Here's the twisted reality. Alex Mercer actually died in that station, and what players control is the virus itself wearing his reanimated corpse like a perfectly crafted disguise. Blacklight's most terrifying aspect is its perfect mimicry, allowing infected beings to impersonate anyone they've consumed, making trust impossible in a city under quarantine. The infection spreads through direct contact rather than bites, creating runners, hunters, and other grotesque mutations that swarm through New York streets, while Alex literally becomes a walking biological weapon, capable of transforming his limbs into claws, blades, and hammer fists. Military forces deployed devastating firepower against the outbreak, turning Manhattan into a war zone where civilians become collateral damage in the fight against an unstoppable biological weapon that doesn't just want to spread, but evolve. School Live weaponizes the Mo anime format as psychological warfare, creating the most devastating bait and switch in zombie fiction by disguising a brutal apocalypse as a cute girls doing cute things series, until viewers realize the quote-unquote school club activities are actually desperate survival tactics. The outbreak, speculated to be caused by a biological weapon possibly connected to the shady Randall Corporation, transforms Japan into a zombie wasteland where the infection spreads so rapidly that it consumes the majority of cities within the first day. The series absolutely destroys you by using Yuki Takiya's psychological break from reality as both a coping mechanism and narrative device. She literally cannot process that her beloved school has become a zombie-infested tomb where her friends fight for survival daily. The adorable art style and cheerful music become increasingly unhinged as viewers realize they're watching traumatized teenagers desperately clinging to normalcy while surrounded by the Walking Dead. And honestly, it hits harder than most gore-fested could. School Live proves that sometimes the most effective horror comes from subverting expectations, turning comfort into nightmare fuel where every smile hides unimaginable trauma. Contracted takes the zombie infection concept and makes it absolutely personal by transforming it into a sexually transmitted disease, following Samantha as she contracts a mysterious virus after being drugged and assaulted at a party. This film doesn't mess around with traditional zombie action. Instead, it delivers a deeply disturbing look at gradual physical and mental deterioration as Samantha's body begins rotting from the inside out over several days. Her symptoms start subtly with nausea and fatigue, but escalate to horrific bodily decay, including bleeding from orifices, tooth loss, and flesh literally falling away in chunks. The virus spreads through sexual contact, creating a horror narrative that doubles as commentary on sexual assault, disease stigma, and bodily autonomy. And honestly, it's more terrifying than any zombie horde. Samantha's desperate attempt to maintain normalcy while her body betrays her creates genuinely disturbing body horror that focuses on personal degradation rather than action sequences. The infection's patient zero is revealed to be a necrophiliac who contracted the disease from corpses, establishing a chain of transmission that makes every intimate encounter potentially fatal. By the film's end, Samantha has become a carrier who will inevitably spread the infection to others, creating a cycle of contamination driven by human connection itself. SAS Zombie Assault absolutely launches the zombie apocalypse into the far future of year 3104, where the Thurna N virus spreads across an entire Trans-Federation planet, causing inhabitants to mutate into walking corpses and undead monstrosities that create a planetary pandemic. Ninja Kiwi's sci-fi masterpiece transforms the zombie formula by setting humanity's fight for survival in space stations and alien worlds, where the Curios Space Control Station becomes ground zero as an unknown virus infects most, if not all, humans, trapping SAS forces to defend military space shuttle Mantis 12 when malfunctioning ramps prevent their escape. Here's the wild part. Humanity has been locked in the zombie war since the early 32nd millennium, when zombie outbreaks started occurring across multiple planets, turning what should be mankind's greatest era of technological advancement into a desperate struggle against an interstellar undead plague. The game's top-down shooter mechanics, combined with RPG elements, creates a genuinely addictive experience where players must strategically upgrade weapons and armor while facing hordes of space zombies that represents horror from humanity's past, unleashed on distant worlds. SAS-4 proves that even 1,000 years in the future, when humanity has conquered the stars, the Walking Dead will find new ways to drag civilization back into darkness. And honestly, that's both terrifying and kind of impressive. Pride and Prejudice and Zombies absolutely serves up Jane Austen's classic romance with a side of zombie apocalypse, by inserting a plague into Regency-era England, where the Bennett sisters are trained in deadly martial arts alongside their education in proper etiquette, because apparently learning to curtsy and decapitate zombies goes hand in hand. The unmentionables, or dreadfuls, rise from their graves due to an unexpected plague, forcing England's upper class to adapt their social customs around zombie fighting protocols. And honestly, Victorian ladies with swords just hits different. Elizabeth Bennet becomes a sword-wielding warrior who can dispatch zombies with elegant brutality while maintaining her sharp wit and romantic tension with Mr. Darcy. Talk about multitasking. The story cleverly parallels social prejudices with literal fears of the undead, as characters must navigate both drawing room politics and zombie battlefields like some kind of twisted social media algorithm. Training in the deadly arts becomes as essential as learning French or piano for young ladies of sophistication, creating absolutely unhinged juxtapositions between mannered society and visceral combat. The film balances period romance conventions with zombie action, though it often struggles to merge these desperate elements into a cohesive tone. But let's be real, the concept alone is iconic enough to forgive the chaos. The Warhammer 40,000 universe absolutely goes hard with multiple zombie-creating plagues, most notably the zombie plague and various chaos-spawned infections that serve the dark gods of the warp, because apparently regular space warfare wasn't dystopian enough. Nurgle, the chaos god of decay and disease, creates zombies through his supernatural plagues that not only reanimate the dead, but often grant them grotesque resilience and the ability to spread infection through mere proximity, turning entire battlefields into walking biological hazards. The dreaded zombie plague can affect entire planetary populations, creating shambling hordes that retain enough intelligence to use basic weapons while being driven by an insatiable hunger for living flesh. Imagine zombies with guns and proximity. That's kind of OP. These chaos zombies are genuinely terrifying because they're sustained by warp energy rather than biological processes, making them nearly impossible to permanently destroy without psychic intervention or blessed weapons. Tyrannid bioweapons also create zombie-like creatures through parasitic organisms that reanimate corpses as expendable shock troops for the Hive Fleet's planetary consumption. Because why have one apocalyptic threat when you can have several? The Imperium's response to zombie outbreaks typically involves exterminatus protocols, orbital bombardment that destroys entire worlds rather than risk the infection spreading to other systems. And honestly, that's peak nuke it from orbit energy. Imperial god forces facing zombie hordes must balance fighting the undead threat while watching for signs of chaos corruption among their own ranks, as prolonged exposure to warp-tainted zombies can drive soldiers insane. The galaxy's constant warfare ensures abundant corpses for reanimation, making zombie outbreaks a persistent threat across countless war-torn worlds where the barriers between life and death have grown dangerously thin. Dead Space plunges players into the claustrophobic corridors of the USG Ishimura, a massive mining vessel where the unearthing of an ancient alien artifact called the Red Marker has unleashed a catastrophic necromorph outbreak that began on the planet of Aegis 7. These reanimated corpses are created through a unified infection derived from a genetic code etched into and transmitted by the markers, making them fundamentally different from traditional zombies, as they're the result of alien manipulation designed to trick dominant species into creating copies under the guise of limitless energy. The outbreak escalated when the activation of Marker 3A on Aegis 7 created a massive hive mind that acted as a nexus between the marker and the rest of the necromorphs, establishing a telepathic network that coordinates the alien swarm with terrifying intelligence. Engineer Isaac Clarke becomes trapped aboard the ship while searching for his girlfriend, armed only with mining tools that he must repurpose as weapons against increasingly horrific mutations that retain disturbing human characteristics while being twisted into impossible anatomical configurations. The game's strategic dismemberment system forces players to carefully target specific body parts, making each encounter a tactical puzzle rather than simple shooting. Religious fanaticism surrounding the marker adds another layer of horror as surviving crew members have been driven insane by its psychic influence, blurring the lines between salvation and damnation in humanity's darkest hour. Zombie U's zombie apocalypse hits London through something called the Last Blight, a deadly plague that covers the city in thick fog and represents the second time in history such horror has destroyed the area. The outbreak begins in November 2012 as part of an ancient prediction called the Black Prophecy, mixing supernatural mystery with biological terror in ways that make the infection feel cursed rather than just scientific. London's zombies keep weird habits from when they were human, like getting distracted by music at parties, showing they still react with familiar sounds even when hunting for fresh meat. The lore goes deeper by tying the outbreak to real historical events, suggesting that London is doomed to repeat its darkest chapters because of ancient secrets and forgotten warnings. Unlike typical zombie stories, Zombie U's infection feels like a punishment sent by fate, blending old legend with modern fears of unstoppable disease. The infection spreads so quickly that police and military forces completely lose control, with massive death and new infections proving that even well-prepared governments can't stop a virus meant to fulfill old prophecies. Survivors must sneak through fog-covered streets where famous London landmarks like Buckingham Palace and Tower Bridge become deadly zombie hunting grounds filled with infected former citizens, making the city itself feel haunted by its own history. Black Summer is a Netflix original and a spin-off prequel to Z Nation, but it ditches the comedy and wild antics for a raw, terrifying look at the earliest days of a zombie apocalypse. The virus at the center of the outbreak, known as ZN1 or the Red Death, was originally engineered as a bioweapon, and its effects are absolutely brutal. Victims turn into zombies within seconds to minutes after being bitten, scratched, or even just dying from unrelated causes. This rapid transformation leaves zero time for goodbyes or rescue, and the undead are fast, relentless, and require serious head trauma to be stopped. Unlike many other zombie shows, most survivors in Black Summer have no idea how to kill zombies at first, making every encounter chaotic and deadly. The show is infamous for showing how quickly society falls apart. The military tries to evacuate civilians, but confusion, panic, and a total lack of preparation lead to disaster. The government and authorities are overwhelmed almost immediately, unable to contain the virus as it mutates from bloodborne to airborne, making everyone a potential carrier. With no safe zones and no real plan, people are just cooked and left to fend for themselves. Over time, the zombie bodies decompose, but they remain dangerous for years. Black Summer stands out for its intense, realistic portrayal of societal collapse, where the real horror isn't just the zombies, but how quickly humans can turn on each other when everything falls apart. The Night Eats the World isolates its protagonist Sam in a Parisian apartment building after a zombie outbreak transforms the city overnight, trapping him in a world where the infected hunt relentlessly by sound but mysteriously become dormant during daylight hours, establishing a unique day-night survival cycle. Sam's methodical fortification of his building becomes both his salvation and his psychological prison, as months of complete isolation slowly unravel his sanity through desperate conversations with a zombie he keeps trapped in an elevator. The film transforms typical zombie horror into an intimate character study of solitude's devastating effects, showing how survival itself can become a form of torment when human connection is stripped away. His discovery of another survivor introduces fleeting hope, but also the crushing reminder of everything he's lost during his extended exile from humanity. The zombies themselves are portrayed as primal, animalistic creatures, driven purely by instinct, creating a world where the living mind itself poses as much of a threat to survival as the undead flesh. This French horror masterpiece proves that the most terrifying monster isn't the one trying to eat you, it's the one staring back from the mirror after months of talking to yourself. What if I told you that one bite of contaminated fish could cook an entire city in just 72 hours? That's exactly what happens in Siam, where humanity faces one of its most terrifying nightmares. The zombie outbreak originates from microorganisms released from melting glaciers, which infected fish and created a deadly bacteria that spreads through the ocean. The apocalypse kicks off when millions of fish start dying from this bacterial infection, creating a massive food shortage that pushes Thailand to the brink of starvation. Then enters Mr. Vasu, a CEO of VS Corporation, who sees this crisis as a business opportunity and starts distributing this contaminated fish to desperate civilians during the food shortage. These greedy assholes will literally do anything to turn a profit, which is actually insane. The outbreak begins when Mr. Vasu's trusted associate and others eat infected fish and die, only to return as zombies shortly after. The virus spreads from this central contamination point in what appears to be a hospital setting before exploding into the general population within hours. What makes Siam are the badass fight scenes where the main character Singh, a former Muay Thai fighter working as a delivery driver, gets thrown into this nightmare where he has to rescue his girlfriend Rin, a doctor trapped in that quarantined hospital with a young boy named Buddy. Singh's professional fighting background becomes absolutely crucial as he literally punches, elbows, and kicks to beat the shit out of zombies, which makes the action sequences brutal and satisfying to watch. The film's creators spent months researching actual military bioweapon programs, making every scientific detail uncomfortably plausible. As the outbreak spreads across the city, we see the government's desperate response, from emergency broadcasts to full lockdown, telling people to remain calm while jets are literally carpet bombing and damn near nuking neighborhoods to contain the virus. Now, what if you could collapse the entire world from your phone all during your lunch break? Plague Inc. isn't just a silly mobile game you play on the toilet. The simulation uses real epidemic-driven data and disease transmission models that scientists actually study. The game shows how fast a deadly virus or even a zombie break could spread across the globe. And once you start playing, you'll never look at a pandemic or a zombie movie the same way again. Players quickly realized that the most successful pandemics start small and spread silently before symptoms appear, just like COVID taught us. It uses real-world ideas from disease experts and even caught the attention of the CDC. You start by infecting a single person and watch as airports, cities, and countries crumble. The most viral pandemics begin quietly. No symptoms, no panic until it's way too late. In the zombie mode called Necronomicon Virus, you don't just infect people. You turn them into the undead and manage massive hordes as governments fight back with martial law and military zones. The virus scenario specifically shows how a zombie pathogen would realistically spread across continents. The scariest part? It actually feels realistic. What makes Plague Inc. terrifying is how it reveals the harsh truth. Our modern connected world is perfectly designed for global extinction events. The game's creators consulted with the CDC, making it disturbingly accurate about how quickly society would collapse. In the Necrovirus mode, you literally watch governments implement martial law, see borders close in real time, and witness the exact moment when military forces abandon their post. The game even simulates how zombie hordes would overwhelm refugee camps and safe zones, showing why every zombie movie gets the human element wrong. Players often discover that the real challenge isn't spreading the infection, it's timing the zombie resurrection perfectly to prevent humanity from developing a cure. As you progress, you unlock disturbing abilities like making zombies ignore the cold so they can spread in northern countries, or giving them enhanced smell to track survivors hiding in bunkers. The game forces you to think like a pandemic. You start in poor countries with weak healthcare systems, then spread to rich nations through airports and seaports while staying undetected. You'll see headlines pop up like state of emergency declared and mass graves dug in cities, and suddenly it doesn't feel like fiction anymore. The Technocyte virus in Warframe isn't your average plague. It's a bioengineered nightmare that fuses flesh and machine into something far more terrifying and honestly pretty badass. Originally created by the ancient Orokin Empire as a weapon to fight an enemy called the Sentients, the virus quickly spiraled out of control. It infects living beings through spores or physical contact, hijacking their bodies on a cellular level while keeping them painfully aware throughout the transformation. The result is the Infested, a grotesque swarm made up of former soldiers, workers, and civilians, now part of a massive hive mind spanning entire star systems. These creatures don't stumble around brainlessly. They straight up plot their enemy's demise and evolve rapidly to counter any threat. Even entire ships and buildings are consumed by the virus, turning cold metal into pulsating organic tunnels. Worst of all, the warframes themselves, your player's characters, were built using a controlled form of the same virus. In the lore of Warframe, the Orokin engineered a specific strain of the Technocyte virus, known as the Helminth virus, to create warframes. This was done to develop powerful soldiers to combat the sentients during the Old War. The line between enemy and weapon is razor thin, and in the world of Warframe, the real horror isn't just the mutation, it's realizing how easily science and warfare can create something unstoppable. Sweet Home completely changes how we think about transformation, and it's way more messed up than anything you've seen before. This Korean horror series on Netflix doesn't use any virus or scientific explanation. Instead, people transform into monsters based on their deepest psychological desires and trauma. Shit reminds me of like a twisted Hellraiser transformation, and it's actually scary as hell to see. The monster outbreak starts when humans begin showing symptoms like nosebleeds and strange behaviors. But here's the crazy part. The final monster form reflects whatever dark thoughts were eating them alive inside. A suicidal person becomes a self-destructive creature, while someone filled with rage turns into a pure killing machine designed for violence. Sweet Home hits different because watching characters you care about slowly lose their humanity as the curse spreads through emotional breakdowns and despair really makes you truly feel bad for them. The series follows survivors trapped in a green home apartment complex as the world outside becomes a literal nightmare filled with crash-out monsters. These aren't mindless zombie hordes. They're intelligent creatures that can evolve, enter cocoon stages, and develop new abilities based on their human memories. Some people become special infectees who keep their human consciousness while gaining monster powers, creating this difficult gray area that makes you question what it means to be truly human. The scariest part isn't just the monster designs themselves, although for me, that's a large part of the fright, but it's realizing that just losing hope in this world and not having a strong will can literally transform you into the very monsters you're trying to survive against. Hunt Showdown 1896 brings us one of the most unique zombie apocalypse scenarios in gaming history. Set in Colorado and the Louisiana Bayou after a mysterious viral outbreak. These creatures aren't your typical brain-eating walkers. They're victims of something called the Sculptor, a supernatural entity that creates twisted monsters known as grunts, hives, and other nightmarish creatures while also causing the dead to reanimate. The zombie virus outbreak has taken over areas around New Orleans and a Colorado mining town, turning normal people into coordinated killing machines that are way smarter than regular zombies. Every bounty hunter in the game has to take a special serum called inoculation that protects them from the Sculptor's influence, because without it, you'd become one of these monsters just by walking into an infected area. The zombie survival horror gets intense when you realize you're not just fighting AI enemies. Other players are thrown into this environment, creating this crazy PvP situation where other players are in the mix hunting the same boss and aiming to steal the bounty. Boss fights against creatures like the spider will test your gaming skills for real, especially when this thing's moving super fast and crawls all over walls and ceilings. Shit reminded me of Aragorn and the spiders in that damn forbidden forest from Harry Potter. The assassin boss, made of swarming bugs that form a human shape, is another challenge that'll make you feel like you're playing Elden Ring. Hunt Showdown's excitement comes from the constant tension. Every step you take, you're torn between fighting off supernatural horrors and watching your back for rival hunters ready to ambush you and steal everything you survived and worked for. Dead Trigger delivers an awesome zombie apocalypse plot twist in mobile gaming. The entire outbreak was planned by rich elites who wanted to control the world's population. This isn't just another accidental leak story. This is straight up conspiracy theory type shit that makes you think twice about every zombie virus outbreak we've seen in this series. The zombie infection spreads incredibly fast and creates specialized zombie types. We're talking police zombies that remember their training, SWAT zombies with tactical knowledge, and massive Hulk zombies that can tear through walls like paper. What makes the Dead Trigger zombie virus unique is how it doesn't just bring back people from the dead, it somehow makes them stronger, faster, and more dangerous than they ever were alive. As Survivor Kyle, you're fighting with a group of survivors called New Hope against endless zombie waves of creatures that keep getting smarter with every mutation, and running out of ammo is considered an absolute fumble. Dead Trigger 2 zombie gameplay cranks up the difficulty with even bigger zombie hordes and boss monsters that'll test your zombie shooting thumb skills to the max. As you battle through upgraded zombies, you're not just fighting for survival. You're up against a hidden Illuminati-ass group of people pulling the strings to keep the nightmare going while everyone else is trapped in chaos, making sure humanity never finds a cure for their engineered zombie plague. The Walking Dead Saints and Sinners drops you right into the nightmare of a zombie apocalypse triggered by one of the most chilling virus origins in fiction. This VR game was specifically designed by Skydance Interactive to give you one of the most immersive zombie apocalypse experiences possible, based primarily on Robert Kirkman's comic book series rather than the TV show. The whole disaster started with the wildfire virus, which was almost certainly created in a French biomedical lab, La Biomedicine DDMI, around late 2009 or early 2010. Scientists were reportedly trying to cure diseases like Alzheimer's using experimental viruses designed to repair brain tissue, but things, of course, went sideways when the virus mutated, became airborne, and spread silently across the globe for months before anyone realized what was happening. By April 2010, the CDC had already picked up on its existence, and by August 25th, the wildfire was declared a global pandemic as society crumbled in a matter of weeks. The truly horrifying twist, directly reflecting the infamous TV show, everyone on Earth was infected whether they knew it or not, and when any person died, no matter how, they were reanimated as a walker. Saints and Sinners puts you in the flooded ruins of New Orleans, where the chaos from both the Walker outbreak and the aftermath of a hurricane has turned the city into a brutal survival zone. The danger isn't just the dead, it's the living, as you scavenge for supplies and craft weapons while facing off against ruthless human factions like the Tower and the Reclaimed, making every encounter a risky gamble. Walker types get nastier with unique variants lurking in the Louisiana swamps, and every moral decision you make impacts the world around you and your chances of survival in this nightmare where people can be even more dangerous than the monsters shambling through the streets. Netflix's Santa Clarita Diet takes zombie lore and flips it into this bizarrely wholesome family comedy where suburban mom Sheila Hammond becomes undead after eating some sketchy seafood. Bad clams turned her into a zombie, but these weren't just any clams. They were blood red clams found 90 meters deep in a Serbian cave, the same location where the original zombie outbreak began centuries ago. The show reveals that people become undead by consuming a Serbian zombie virus and throwing up a liver-red organ-like ball which becomes a weird-ass spider, which is honestly one of the weirdest zombie transformation sequences I've ever seen in the series. Unlike traditional zombies, Sheila retains her personality, intelligence, and memories. She's just got this inconvenient fetish for human flesh and superhuman strength. The virus can spread through bites, but the infected don't immediately turn into mindless killing machines. Instead, they become these enhanced versions of themselves with zero impulse control. The show's take on zombie mythology focuses more on the domestic chaos of hiding your cannibalistic lifestyle from noisy neighbors while trying to maintain a normal family dynamic. The series got cancelled on a cliffhanger, but the Serbian connection suggests this outbreak has ancient origins tied to some seriously dark European folklore. Based on the DC Comics and Vertigo series by Chris Robertson and Michael Allred, iZombie turned the undead condition into something more like a manageable chronic illness than a death sentence. The zombie virus in this CW adaptation was created when this sus energy drink company Max Rager's synthetic party drug called Utopium gets mixed with their Red Bull style energy drink at a boat party, creating zombies instead of the intended euphoric sugar and caffeine high that the partygoers were chasing. Medical resident Olivia Liv Moore gets scratched during the chaos and wakes up as a zombie, retaining all memories, personality, and intelligence, while just needing to eat brains regularly to avoid going full-on Romero mode. The brilliant twist that makes this show kinda cool is that when zombies consume brains, they temporarily absorb the deceased person's memories and personality traits, which is how Liv ends up working at the coroner's office helping Detective Clive solve murder cases using the victim's own memories. The virus can spread through scratches and bites, but it can also be cured with a tainted utopium antidote that has dangerous side effects, creating this constant tension between staying zombie or risking death for a chance at humanity. The series builds towards an all-out zombie-human war, complete with underground zombie fight clubs, corporate conspiracies involving Max Rager's cover-ups, and a systematic zombie experimentation that makes Big Pharma look like amateur hour compared to the military-industrial complex trying to weaponize the undead. While Wolfenstein isn't technically a zombie franchise, the zombie experiments with undead super soldiers and occult resurrection creates some seriously zombie-adjacent nightmare fuel that deserves recognition. The Nazi regime in this alternate timeline combines advanced technology with supernatural practice of hidden knowledge and powers to create unstoppable undead warriors that can take multiple headshots and keep it pushing. These reanimated super soldiers are products of General Death Sheet's twisted experiments that blend cutting-edge robotics with necromantic rituals, creating cybernetic zombies that are part machine, part corpse, and completely terrifying. I don't know why, but every time Nazis in Germany are involved, they're always doing some twisted weird shit with these serums. The virus, or process that creates these undead soldiers, isn't fully explained, but it involves a combination of chemical enhancement, surgical modification, and what appears to be supernatural resurrection techniques borrowed from ancient Germanic mythology. These tactical nightmares use advanced weapons, coordinate attacks, and can survive damage that would drop a normal human instantly. The series escalates through different zombie cyborg variants, including flamethrower units, heavy armor variants, and even undead mech pilots that blur the lines between technology and zombie enhanced. The difficulty spikes come from the combination of advanced AI, overwhelming firepower, and fighting enemies that should be dead but refuse to stay down. Imagine if zombies could perfectly disguise themselves as normal humans and infiltrate your community before revealing their true nature. That's the nightmare scenario in Survivors, Invisible Strain, a colony-building survival sim that takes zombie horror to psychological levels. This isn't just another zombie game where you can spot the undead from a mile away. The Invisible Strain creates infected individuals who look, act, and behave exactly like regular survivors until they suddenly turn and attack your settlement from within. The game features multiple infection strains with different incubation periods and symptoms, including green, blue, red, and white variants that each present unique challenges and levels of aggression once they fully manifest. The Invisible Strain virus spreads through airborne particles, contaminated water sources, and direct contact, but the terrifying twist is that the infected can remain hidden in your community for days or even weeks before showing visible symptoms like skin discoloration and increased aggression. Players must constantly assess every new survivor who joins their settlement, looking for subtle behavioral changes, unusual eating patterns, or other warning signs that someone might be carrying the invisible strain pathogen. You'll manage complex community relationships while building defensive structures, researching treatments, and making brutal decisions about quarantining suspected carriers, even when you're not completely sure they're infected. The difficulty escalates as infected hordes grow more coordinated and aggressive over time, forcing players to balance the desperate need for new community members against the constant risk that any new arrival could be the invisible strain carrier that destroys everything you've built. Okay, hold up. Anime zombie idols that can actually sing and dance without decomposing on stage? Zombieland Saga completely breaks every zombie rule you know and somehow makes it work perfectly. The story follows 7 legendary zombie girls resurrected by the mysterious Kotaro Tatsumi as part of his insane plan to revive Saga Prefecture's declining entertainment industry through the power of undead idol performances. They're fully conscious, personality intact zombie performers who retain all their memories, skills, and quirks from their original lives, spanning different historical periods. The resurrection process is never fully explained, but Kotaro clearly has access to some serious necromantic knowledge that can bring back people who died decades or even centuries apart. What makes this concept brilliant is that the girls have to hide their zombie nature from the public while performing, which creates this constant tension between their undead reality and idol personas. The series explores each girl's tragic death story, from a legendary 80s idol who died in a plane crash to a courtesan from the Meiji era, and how they adapted to modern idol culture while dealing with the psychological trauma of being dead. The lore gets deeper as the series progresses, hinting at Kotaro's mysterious past connections to some of the girls and his obsessive dedication to this zombie idol experiment that borders on unhinged supernatural stalking. Set in 1941 Thailand during the Japanese invasion, Operation Undead takes zombie horror and mixes it with World War II historical drama to create something genuinely terrifying. The Japanese forces brings with them a biological weapon that they think will guarantee victory, but this terrifying virus, of course, has its own agenda and turns both invaders and defenders into flesh-hungry monsters. Young Thai soldiers Mok and his cutthroat unit find themselves fighting a two-front war against Japanese invaders and the undead nightmare that's consuming everyone in its path. The biological weapon appears to be some kind of engineered pathogen that the Japanese military developed, possibly through human experimentation. But like most zombie virus origins, the creators severely underestimated what they were unleashing. The film shows how quickly organized military units fall apart when facing an enemy that can't be negotiated with, scared off, or reasoned with. The virus spreads through the jungle warfare environment, turning the dense Southeast Asian landscape into a perfect breeding ground for zombie hordes that are adapted to tropical survival conditions. Operation Undead stands out because it combines legitimate historical warfare with zombie survival horror, showing how regular soldiers would realistically react when all that training shit becomes useless against enemies that should be dead. When you crack open that blood-soaked Necronomicon, Ex Mortis, and the Evil Dead, you're not just reading a book, you're unleashing hell itself. This film completely changed Cabin in the Woods horror and gave birth to an undead franchise that flips everything upside down by turning knowledge into your worst nightmare. The success of this movie led to Evil Dead 2 and the time-traveling horror comedy Armor of Darkness, showing that this cursed book was staying with fans forever. One spoken spell, one playback of that cursed tape recorder, and suddenly the Kandarian demon comes knocking at your door like the world's most uninvited guest you just never wanted showing up. Deadites brings a level of twist that separates them from every other undead threat. These predators remember everything about their victims, mocking you with your dead girlfriend's voice, shape-shifting into loved ones, and all kinds of shit to mess with your head before they start tearing you apart. The possession spreads through scratches, bites, or simply just dying near the evil force, creating a completely random infection pattern that keeps you constantly guessing who's turning next. The body horror reaches absolute disgusting levels as victims go through gross transformations. Faces twist into demonic grins, arms morph into living weapons, and voices shift between sweet whispers and inhumane screams. Even worse, they work as a team, calling themselves We, turning every fight into a battle against an army of supernatural evil rather than individual threats themselves. Ancient beings, called the Dark Ones, created this book bound in human skin and written in blood, designing it specifically for summoning demons and taking over humanity. Their evil plan created a supernatural infection that feeds on human curiosity and turns knowledge into a weapon. This counts as an outbreak because the demonic possession spreads quickly between people, but it's definitely not a zombie virus since Deadites keep their memories, intelligence, and other supernatural powers that no germ could ever give them. Ash Williams transforms from a terrified college student into a chainsaw-wielding, one-liner dropping demon hunter after chopping off his own infected hand in pure desperation. The series uses that creepy first-person camera angle to make you feel like you're the evil force hunting everyone down, while sunlight occasionally offers brief moments of hope before the darkness returns. When George Romero brought us Land of the Dead in 2005, he didn't just continue his zombie legacy, he completely reimagined what a zombie apocalypse could look like decades after the initial outbreak. This film takes place in Romero's zombie universe years into the undead apocalypse, showing a world where humanity has adapted but definitely not thrived. Set in a walled-off Pittsburgh where the rich live it up in the luxurious Fiddler's Green skyscraper while the poor scramble for scraps in the dangerous streets below. The real difference in this movie is Big Daddy, which is crazy to say, but a zombie who used to pump gas but now leads an entire undead army with actual intelligence and strategy, similar to what we see in 28 Years Later and the Alphas from the Army of the Dead. Unlike mindless flesh eaters, these zombies are learning, organizing, and even using tools to fight back against their human oppressors. When Big Daddy figures out that those shiny fireworks are just distractions and teaches other zombies to ignore them, you realize these aren't just normal monsters anymore. They're a revolutionary force that's here to cause problems. The film's brutal honesty about human nature hits harder than most of the zombie bites. Paul Kaufman, the ruthless businessman controlling the city, and the armored war machine called Dead Reckoning represents everything wrong with unchecked capitalism and power, even when everyone's dead. Meanwhile, Riley Denbo, who actually built Dead Reckoning, becomes the reluctant hero trying to escape the whole shit entirely. Romero brilliantly uses the zombie threat to expose how the real monsters might actually be the humans hoarding resources while everyone else just straight suffers. The climax sees Big Daddy's zombie uprise storming Fiddler's Green like an undead French Revolution, proving that even in death, the working class can still organize and fight back against their oppressors. Corporate arrogance reached peak levels when Horizon Biotech decided that cloning and genetic modification were the keys to creating the perfect soldier. But Dr. Kevin Clamley's experiments produced something entirely different. Instead of obedient super soldiers, the London lab birthed Zeds, weaponized creatures that each bring their own flavor of nightmare to the battlefield. These bioengineered monsters broke containment and swept across Europe, turning the continent into a testing ground for humanity's worst scientific mistakes. The Zed roster reads like a horror fan's wish list gone wrong. Clots overwhelm you through sheer numbers, while my personal favorite, the crawlers, can attack from above or below like twisted spiders, and bloats turn their own death into a toxic gas attack that keeps on giving. The real threats come in the form of scrakes, wielding chainsaws, and flesh pounds whose spiked arms become increasingly dangerous as they build rage. Each creature type demands different tactics and weapons, creating a constantly shifting puzzle of survival. The genius of Killing Floor's approach is that there's no magical cure or antidote coming to save the day. When your apocalypse comes from a corporate lab instead of some ancient curse or mystery virus, you can't exactly pray it away or develop a vaccine quickly. What sets Killing Floor apart is its commitment to making every death feel visceral and consequential. The meat system tracks damage in real time, leaving permanent marks on Zed bodies as you fight, while their specific weaknesses force you to master different weapon types rather than relying on spray and pray tactics. Dr. Claimley himself eventually appears as the Patriarch, a mutated boss-level threat that highlights the greatest monsters are the ones who created the problem in the first place. Last Day on Earth drops you in 2027 and doesn't waste time explaining how the world ended. It just hands you another makeshift weapon and tells you to figure out how to survive another day. This mobile survival game takes the mystery virus approach, keeping the infection's origins completely in the dark while focusing on what really matters, not becoming zombie food while tracking down your next meal. Fans have speculated on several possible origins of the outbreak. Some point to the Genesis Corporation's shady bioengineering projects, who throughout the game are working to uncover the mystery of the virus. They focus on studying anomalies, hoping to find answers to the epidemic. Genesis in the game is searching for a unique zombie virus, believing its samples may aid in combating the virus. Some say a failed military attempt to weaponize the virus, both supported by evidence in bunkers and special zombie variants. Others suggest more unusual causes, like a meteorite releasing a toxic gas that got 80% of the world infected, and survivors have developed immunity to the virus, although zombies can still pose a threat. The outbreak happened fast, civilization crumbled faster, and now you're stuck in a world where every forest, bunker, and abandoned farm is crawling with different flavors of undead. The zombies here aren't just your standard shambling corpses. They've got variety that keeps you guessing. You'll face slow walkers that travel in packs, speedy runners that'll chase you across entire zones, and mutated boss monsters that guard the best loot like angry security guards. The interesting part of Last Days on Earth is how it turns survival into an addictive daily grind. Every decision revolves around the brutal math of staying alive. Do you risk venturing into the zombie-infested city for medical supplies, or play it safe and hope your makeshift bandages hold out another day? Your base becomes your lifeline, but even that needs constant upgrades to fend off zombie raids and human raiders who are just as desperate as you. Pontypool reinvented the zombie genre. It threw out everything you thought you knew about outbreaks and replaced it with something different, but it came off as brilliant. A virus that spreads through words themselves. This isn't your typical bite and turn scenario. Instead, the infection travels through the English language, turning everyday conversation into a deadly weapon. Set in a snowed-in Ontario radio station during what seems like a normal morning show, the film shows that the most terrifying monsters are the words coming out of people's mouths. The mechanics behind this linguistic nightmare are simple. When someone understands certain contaminated English words, they don't just get sick, they become obsessed, repeating those trigger words over and over until they completely lose their minds and turn violent. The interesting twist is that speakers of other languages like French or Armenian remain temporarily safe, making this the first zombie outbreak where being bilingual could actually save your life. Radio host Grant Mozzie, a washed-up radio host who finds himself at ground zero of this plague, realizes that every word he broadcasts could be spreading the infection further across the airwaves. The film's uniqueness lies in its treatment method, semantic confusion. When Grant desperately tries to save his producer Sydney by redefining kill as kiss, he's not just being poetic, he's performing linguistic surgery to break the virus's hold on her mind. This creates the ultimate paradox, where the very thing that spreads the disease, language, also becomes the only possible cure. The film transforms every conversation into a potential death sentence, while suggesting that maybe, just maybe, we can talk our way out of the apocalypse if we're creative enough with our words. When One Cut of the Dead came out, it didn't just break the zombie movie mold, it completely shattered it and rebuilt something entirely new. I honestly enjoyed this movie and was surprised I didn't hear about it until this series. It wasn't too far off from typical zombie tropes, I thought it was impressively done. This micro-budget Japanese film starts with what looks like a pretty standard zombie attack filmed in one continuous take, complete with awkward acting, technical hiccups, and moments that make you wonder if the filmmakers actually knew what they were doing. Every single quote-unquote mistake you'd think you're watching is actually a setup for a brilliant payoff later in the movie. The opening act follows a film crew shooting a low-budget zombie movie at an abandoned water treatment facility. When the director grows frustrated with his actors' lackluster performances, he reveals that the location was once used for military experiments involving a zombie virus, a chemical weapon designed to reanimate the dead. In a moment of desperate inspiration, he decides to make the film more authentic by actually summoning real zombies using an incantation found in the facility's old research notes. What starts as the director's unhinged attempt to inject genuine terror into his production quickly spirals into chaos as actual undead emerge. The zombie outbreak appears to follow classic genre rules. Bites spread infections, the dead rise with insane hungers for human flesh, and survivors must fight their way to safety. The virus seems to work exactly as the military intended, creating relentless undead that retain just enough motor function to genuinely be threatening. As characters fall victim of the outbreak, they join the growing horde, creating an escalating nightmare that traps the remaining survivors in the facility. One cut of the dead's true brilliance lies in its structure. The film reveals that this entire zombie sequence was actually a live television broadcast, and the second act pulls back to show the chaotic behind-the-scenes reality of producing this one-take zombie show. The zombie virus backstory becomes a clever plot device within the show, within the movie, while the real story focuses on a desperate TV crew trying to salvage a live broadcast when everything goes catastrophically wrong. If you're not locked into this movie, I have to admit, it can get very confusing. Director Shinichiro Ueda transforms what intentionally appears to be a straightforward zombie outbreak into a multi-layered celebration of filmmaking itself, where the undead serve not as the primary threat, but as an element in a much more complex story about creativity, family, and the beautiful chaos of independent television production. On Sarah, emotion looked like miracle fuel. It was a luminous liquid found in deep seams underground. Nations fought the pendulum wars to control it. Then the COG refined it with the light mass process to power cities and weapons. Much later, Adam Phoenix proved emotion was not a simple resource. It was a parasitic organism that lived in the liquid. It moved through hosts at the cellular level and forced their cells into constant overdrive. The glow was the giveaway. The longer the exposure, the deeper the takeover. Humans who worked around vapors developed a condition known as rust lung. First came coughing and fatigue, then bleeding and scarring in the lungs. In heavy cases, the parasite spreads beyond the lungs and started to change tissue. Locusts, who lived near the deepest emotion rivers, suffered the worst. The parasite's takeover in them was called lambency. The emulsion spreads through underground mycelium networks like what we see in The Last of Us with the cordyceps, giving a planetary nervous system vibe, possibly even thinking and planning its next move. It pushed growth, pain, and rage, and ended in an unstable state that often exploded. The locusts fought the lambent for years in the hollows and began losing ground. This is why Emergency Day happened. Queen Myra led the locusts to the surface to escape a threat they could no longer contain below. The locusts were not invading for sport. They were running from an extinction event. Humans saw a new enemy and fought back while still pumping emulsion. To make things worse, the light mass bomb the COG used in the first game agitated emulsion across the planet. After that strike, lambency spread faster in both species. By Gears 3, the truth was out. Emulsion was a planet-wide parasite with one goal: replicate and replace living tissue. Lambent wretches, drones, and berserkers were not undead. They were hosts in a late-stage takeover. The yellow veins and harsh glow showed where the parasites had rewired muscle and bone. When the energy buildup hit a limit, the body ruptured. It was equal parts horror and fireworks. Legit fun for no one. So the zombie thread in Gears of War is not a virus or a curse. It's a parasitic energy organism that humans mined by the millions of barrels. Corporations and armies treated it like oil. It turned out to be alive. The locusts tried to outrun it. Humanity tried to bomb it. In the end, The only fix was to kill the parasite everywhere, even if that meant reshaping the world that depended on it. The Returned tackles the undead genre with something uniquely unsettling. Dead people who just show up at your door like they never left. This French supernatural drama drops you into a quiet alpine town where deceased residents start returning home, not as rotting corpses or mindless monsters, but as perfectly preserved versions of themselves from the moment they died. Your teenage daughter, who died in a bus crash 4 years ago, suddenly walks through the front door asking what's for dinner, and honestly, that's way more terrifying and traumatic than any brain-eating zombie could ever be. The interesting pivot of the show lies in how it turns grief into horror without a single bite or infection in sight. These aren't zombies at all. They're emotional grenades walking around in the bodies of your loved ones, carrying all their memories and personalities while completely ignoring the fact that they've been dead for years. In the show, Camille returns to her twin sister and parents like nothing happened, while Simon shows up ready to marry his fiancée who's already moved on and remarried. Talk about awkward. The town's dam and reservoir seem connected to this supernatural phenomenon, creating an eerie environmental mystery that suggests nature itself might be breaking down. What makes The Return brilliant is how it uses the undead concept to explore what we'd actually do if death wasn't permanent. Instead of fighting off hordes with weapons, families struggle with impossible questions. Do you set a placemat at dinner for your dead child? How do you explain to your new husband that your deceased fiancé just came back? The show has a really good soundtrack that perfectly captures the melancholic dread as the town's social fabric slowly unravels. By the second season, more Returned start appearing in groups, but even then, the real horror comes from watching a community try to process the collective grief while their dead neighbors pretend everything is perfectly normal. Tokyo's urban monster scene got a serious biological upgrade when ghouls emerged as predators operating with an entirely different rulebook than anything the horror genre has seen before. These aren't your typical undead creatures, shambling around looking for brains. Ghouls are sophisticated predators with a biological dependency that's both fascinating and horrifying at the same time. They've got specialized organs that store these red child cells, which can transform from liquid to solid in an instant, sprouting deadly appendages that look like weaponized body parts straight out of your worst nightmare. The infection aspect hits different in Tokyo Ghoul because it's not about bites or scratches. It's about organ transplants gone wrong in the most crucial way possible. When college student Kanaki gets ghoul organs surgically implanted after a freak accident, he becomes a half-ghoul hybrid who can't eat normal food anymore and has to survive on human flesh. His body literally rejects everything except human meat, turning every meal into a moral crisis and every day into a struggle between his human conscience and his ghoul hunger. While he can drink water and coffee, normal food causes a powerful urge to vomit and can deteriorate his physical condition. RC cell biology becomes the foundation for exploring identity and survival at a molecular level. Ghouls who embrace excessive cannibalism develop kakuja forms, transforming into monstrous versions of themselves with incredible power at the cost of their sanity. The entire society operates like a hidden ecosystem where ghouls wear masks to blend in with humans while secretly hunting them for food. Predator-prey dynamics disguise themselves as urban fantasy, complete with creatures experiencing the same identity crisis and survival struggles as anyone else, except their grocery shopping involves significantly more moral dilemmas than choosing different brands of cereal. Marvel Earth's 2149 became the testing ground for the most disturbing what-if scenario imaginable. What happens when the world's greatest heroes develop a crash-out level of hunger for human flesh? This isn't just your typical zombie apocalypse where mindless corpses shuffle around. These are superheroes who keep all their powers, personalities, and intelligence while developing an absolutely uncontrollable craving. The infection starts when a zombified sentry crashes in from another dimension, bringing the hunger virus that spreads through good old-fashioned superhero violence. Except now, every punch and bite carries a deadly infection. Watching Spider-Man crack jokes while debating whether to eat his wife creates a uniquely disturbing form of horror that goes beyond typical zombie carnage. Reed Richards channels his scientific brilliance not towards finding a cure, but surprisingly towards figuring out how to spread the infection to other universes. The virus neutralizes their healing factors, trapping these icons as rotting, superpowered corpses who remember exactly what they used to stand for while being completely powerless against their cannibalistic urges. Everything spirals into cosmic level insanity when these zombie heroes actually succeed in devouring Galactus himself, absorbing his world-consuming abilities and becoming the terrifying Galacti. Quicksilver's super speed accidentally makes him the most efficient plague spreader in comic book history, turning a localized outbreak into a global catastrophe faster than anyone could have imagined. Dark comedy emerges from watching beloved characters maintain their personalities while literally salvinating over their next human meal, creating a twisted mirror of superhero mythology where even the noblest intentions crumble under biological compulsion. The Yakuza franchise took a wild left turn with Dead Souls, tossing bioweapons and zombie hordes into the familiar criminal underworld of Komuracho with surprisingly entertaining results. This spin-off takes the Yakuza series' signature blend of melodrama and bone-crushing action, then adds a bioweapon called Thanatos that turns Japan's most famous red light district into a military quarantine zone crawling with mutated zombies. The outbreak isn't just random or an ancient curse. It's a deliberate act of terrorism by arms dealer DD, who unleashes this bioengineered nightmare as part of a criminal conspiracy targeting rival Yakuza factions, which seems counterintuitive, but we'll keep going. The genius of Dead Souls lies in how it maintains the Yakuza series' emotional core while everything literally goes to shit around all the characters. You've got 4 protagonists, Kiryu, Akiyama, Mahima, and Goda, each dealing with the zombie apocalypse through their own unique lenses of horror, loyalty, and family bonds. The Thanatos virus creates different mutation levels, so you're not just fighting regular zombies, but also prototype mutants that look like they just crawled out of a science experiment gone wrong. Meanwhile, the Japan Ground Self-Defense Force has sealed off the entire city with military barricades, turning familiar streets into a war zone. The game perfectly captures that distinctly Japanese approach to horror by mixing genuine terror with moments of absolute absurdity. Mahima gets everyone worried when he appears to be infected, only to reveal it was a false alarm because his dentures prevented the virus from taking hold, which is exactly the kind of ridiculousness yet somehow touching moment that makes Yakuza storytelling so special. The whole thing culminates at Millennium Tower, with helicopter crashes and mutant boss battles. But underneath all the zombie carnage, it's still fundamentally about people protecting their chosen families and communities when everything falls apart. Australian horror filmmakers took one look at the zombie apocalypse genre and decided to completely flip the script with Wormwood, Road of the Dead, creating some seriously inventive world building in the process. It's a film that asks, what if the apocalypse completely broke how fuel works? After the meteor shower hits, gasoline and diesel become useless, but zombie breath and blood suddenly become highly flammable and perfect for powering vehicles. It's like Mad Max met Dawn of the Dead and decided to completely rewrite the rules of both survival and basic chemistry. The day-night mechanics add another layer of tactical nightmare to the zombie threat. During the day, these undead monsters move slower, but their breath is flammable enough to power engines, making them valuable resources as much as deadly enemies. When night falls, they become faster and more dangerous, but their breath stops being flammable, forcing survivors to choose between harvesting fuel during safe daylight hours or risking high-speed zombie encounters after dark. Barry, a mechanic trying to rescue his sister Brooke, has to navigate this new reality while dealing with paramilitary groups conducting twisted experiments on survivors. The film's Australian outback setting becomes more than just scenery. It's a character in itself, with harsh landscapes that mirror the brutal survival situation. Brooke develops psychic control over zombies after being experimented on, turning her from victim into a potential game changer for human survival. The movie balances genuinely heartbreaking moments, like Barry having to nail-gun his own zombified family, with completely over-the-top action sequences involving zombie-powered convoy chases across the wilderness. Wormwood transforms environmental collapse into fuel-powered chaos, showing how creativity and desperation can turn even zombie biology into a twisted form of renewable energy. Kronos, the New Dawn, is set in the decaying district of Nawohota, Poland, after a steelworks disaster unleashes a deadly plague from deep drilling Soviet projects. The city falls into ruins as time itself fractures, creating rifts that blur past and present. The infection is tied to that industrial collapse, a man-made disaster that spirals into something unnatural. Survivors face these creatures called orphans, zombie-like infected that stalk abandoned streets. The lore hints that the plague and the time distortions may be connected, suggesting this outbreak is more than a simple virus. The story follows a traveler, an agent of the mysterious collective, basically there's survivors of the outbreak, who time travel to gather key insights and resources of important individuals to understand the disaster and potentially preserve humanity's remnants for the New Dawn. What makes Kronos stand out is its oppressive atmosphere. Puzzles, exploration, and starvation-driven survival, where every mistake carries permanent consequences. Critics note the combat can feel basic, but the haunting sound design and bleak urban landscapes more than compensate. Fans compare it to games like DayZ and Resident Evil, while Reddit debates whether the stripped-down mechanics are deliberate to emphasize a suspenseful mood opposed to overpowering mechanics. Think BioShock meets Silent Hill, but with its own time-torn identity. The slow pace and constant sense of decay make every corner feel dangerous. It's less about fighting and more about exploring a world that's already gone. The Mi'kmaq Reservation becomes humanity's last refuge when a mysterious plague wipes out everyone except indigenous people. Sheriff Trailer watches the world collapse outside Red Crow's borders while his community faces waves of infected and desperate survivors begging for sanctuary. Director Jeff Barnaby flips zombie tropes completely, making indigenous characters the immune survivors instead of early victims. The outbreak starts small, with fish that refuse to stay dead and a painful sequence of a dog reanimating inside a patrol car, showing how nature itself is rebelling against something deeper. The virus origin stems from a pathogen that infected humanity and spreads like wildfire through the outside world, but the reservation's natural immunity creates an impossible dilemma. Do you help outsiders who might turn violent, or to protect themselves behind closed borders? Barnaby uses the plague as a lens for colonialism, where centuries of injustice finally backfire on those who caused it. The film delivers brutal gore alongside sharp cultural commentary, questioning whether survival means anything if it requires abandoning your humanity. Blood Quantum doesn't explain why indigenous people are immune, because the answer isn't scientific, it's spiritual. The infection represents generations of exploitation coming home to roost, and immunity becomes both a blessing and a curse that isolates the very people it protects. In John Carpenter's Toxic Commando, the apocalypse begins not with a bite, but with a drill. Corporate scientists pierce too deep into the earth, unearthing the ancient sludge god, a primordial entity whose toxic ooze seeps into soil, water, and flesh. The infection spreads like wildfires, twisting humans into ravenous crashouts that pour across highways and settlements. Unlike most outbreaks, this isn't a virus humanity engineered. It's something buried long before us, a poison waiting to be disturbed. The official prequel comic expands on this, showing how early expeditions uncovered strange deposits that corrupted miners long before the game's events. When the game leans into convoy combat and Carpenter's love letter to 80s zombie cinema, the comic reveals a slower unraveling. Corporate cover-ups, soldiers vanishing in sludge-filled tunnels, and the first recorded mutations. Together, they frame the sludge god as more than just a monster. It's a geological curse. The lore makes it clear that this outbreak isn't just about survival against the infected. It's about a world poisoned at its roots, where every drop of ooze carries the weight of something older than civilization, and humanity's arrogance cracked the seal. The community hype behind this game is massive, though critics worry the arcade-style gameplay might sacrifice the horror aspect that the comic laid the foundation for. but overall, the game looks like a must-play, and with the co-op modes, this is hard to skip. Polar fracking throws Earth off its axis, and suddenly, corpses start clawing out of graveyards across small-town America. Jim Jarmusch's deadpan zombie comedy follows cops trying to maintain order while the undead shuffle around, moaning for coffee, Wi-Fi, and designer clothes. This hilarious cast plays everything completely straight, turning genre cliches into sarcastic humor that breaks the tension and trauma from the actual zombies. Bill Murray and Adam Driver treat the apocalypse like a minor inconvenience, delivering bone-dry dialogue while chaos erupts around them. The outbreak's cause is intentionally ridiculous, turning climate change into cosmic punishment where Earth literally can't stay balanced. Jarmusch uses zombies as mirrors for consumer addiction, making the dead crave the same meaningless products that define their living years. Critics split between calling it clever satire or pretentious nonsense, but the film's environmental message hits hard. The lore doesn't care about virus transmission because the real infection is humanity's relationship with consumption and destruction. When the planet itself goes off the hinge, the dead rise, not from disease, but from imbalance. The zombies represent everything wrong with modern society, shambling through streets, still obsessed with the material garbage that killed them in the first place. In Helix, Arctic isolation turns deadly when CDC scientists arrive at the Biosystems Research Facility and uncover Narvik, a genetically engineered pathogen built in secret. Narvik A is brutally efficient, killing nearly all hosts within hours, while Narvik B spares its victims only to twist them into vectors, rapid carriers leaking black ooze that spreads the infection like no other through stale corridors. What takes Narvik to the next level isn't its lethality, but its intent. The virus was never meant to heal or protect. It was created as a weapon. Company documents and in-world files reveal that Narvik strains were designed to test how far the human body could be pushed, with biosystems executives sanctioning human experiments in exchange for control over the technology. The show's claustrophobic setting highlights how quickly containment fails when greed drives research, and Reddit discussions often point to Narvik's origins as the most chilling element of the series. Later seasons veer into immortality conspiracies, but the original Outbreak remains at the forefront because it feels plausible. A lab-made bioweapon evolving faster than its creators predicted, which we've seen plenty times before. The lore cements Narvik as a calculated infection, one that proves humanity's greatest threat is rarely nature itself. It's the science we bend towards power. Indonesia's first zombie drama drops viewers into Rimbalaya, where industrial corruption creates an outbreak that spreads through scent-driven undead. A journalist and factory worker uncover government negligence while fighting for survival in gritty street-level conditions. The series uses practical effects and raw cinematography that feels worlds apart from polished Korean zombie production. The cast is super cool, and I enjoyed the raw feel the series had. Zona Mira grounds its outbreak in an environmental disaster where toxic runoff from factories mutates into a deadly pathogen that officials ignored until it was too late. This is very similar to how the virus and the sadness got spread so fast. The lore paints a picture of systematic failure where corporate profits mattered more than public safety warnings. Workers report strange illnesses for months, but government inspectors took bribes to look the other way. The virus becomes a metaphor for corruption itself, spreading through communities already poisoned by industrial neglect and political greed. The interesting and I guess ironic part of it all was that it was entirely preventable, born from human choices rather than scientific accidents or natural disasters. The undead represent the consequences of a society that values profit over people, where environmental destruction finally creates something that can't be bought off or covered up. Zona Mira uses horror to expose real-world problems, making every zombie a reminder of institutional failure. Napoleonic Europe becomes a plague-ravished wasteland where rival survivors fight for scraps while avoiding infected horrors in an extraction RPG type of game mode. Death means losing everything, creating razor-sharp tension as players navigate dark villages with primitive medicine and desperate combat. The gothic atmosphere feels unlike anything else in the zombie genre, mixing historical authenticity with supernatural dread. Fans compare it to Escape from Tarkov, but soaked in horror that makes every match feel like a nightmare. The lore brilliantly blurs medical reality with folklore, where villagers blame bad air and cursed corpses, while scientific notes suggest rats and poor sanitation spread the actual disease. This duality makes the outbreak feel mythological and historically accurate, letting players experience infection as people from that era would understand it. The plague represents humanity's struggle against forces beyond their comprehension, where religious superstition meets early medical knowledge. What makes Hunger a badass game is that players never know if they're fighting actual disease or something more sinister. The infection can be bacterial, supernatural, or both, reflecting how 19th century people would have experienced unexplained death and reanimation. History becomes horror when the dead refuse to stay buried, and survival depends on understanding threats that science hasn't yet learned to explain. LucasArts delivers pure B-movie chaos in this 1993 cult classic, where players fight zombies, vampires, and chainsaw maniacs across 48 colorful levels using squirt guns and soda cans. The game parodies horror films with slapstick humor and surprisingly challenging gameplay that still attracts speedrunners today. Censorship controversies only boosted its cult appeal as different regions toned down blood and chainsaw violence. The outbreak comes from Dr. Tongue, a mad scientist who unleashes every monster movie trope at once across suburban neighborhoods. Instead of realistic infection, the lore treats horror like Saturday morning cartoons, where evil scientists can summon any creature they want. The virus is pure pop culture, mixing zombie outbreaks with vampire attacks and werewolf invasions, because why limit yourself to one monster? Zombies Ate My Neighbors doesn't care about scientific explanation because it's celebrating the absurdity of horror entertainment. The infection spreads through pure cartoon logic, where mad scientists create problems that can only be solved with household items and determination. Players rescue cheerleaders, babies, and tourists from monsters that exist because someone thought it would be fun to terrorize the suburbs. The real virus here is nostalgia for simpler times, when horror could be goofy instead of terrifying. Ill takes the intimacy of infection and makes it unbearable. This indie horror project promises AAA level realism with environments drenched in decay and mutation sequences so detailed they've been called the next Dead Space. Players experience the outbreak in first person, watching neighbors and friends gradually deform into monstrosities. Every trailer has gone viral thanks to its obsession with meat physics and grotesque detail, but beneath the lens lies a darker foundation. The infection doesn't begin with the lab leak or ancient curse. It seeps from toxic industrial runoff. Contaminants in rivers and water supplies mutate existing pathogens until they cross into something contagious, something human bodies can't fight. Developers have teased in interviews that early victims weren't test subjects, but ordinary residents who lived downstream from corporate waste. The lore points to negligence and cover-up. Companies knew the water was poison, and silence allowed the infection to spread unchecked. What makes Ill terrifying is the way the infection unfolds. Slow, personal, and cruel. Victims remain conscious as their body warps, remembering who they were even as they lose control. It isn't just the zombie virus, it's identity itself rotting away, piece by piece, under the weight of human greed. A bioweapon nuclear hybrid wipes out adults, leaving teenagers to rule the ruins while ghoulies wander around mindlessly, repeating their last words. High school cliches become kingdoms, with gamers, cheerleaders, and jocks carving out territory in post-apocalyptic California. Netflix's series mixes comic book visuals with fourth wall humor, delivering sharp commentary on youth resilience despite being canceled after one season. The lore suggests military experiments backfired, releasing a virus tied to nuclear fallout that specifically targets mature brain chemistry. Adults don't just die, they become echoes of their former selves, doomed to repeat the same phrases forever. The ghoulies represent everything wrong with adult society, shambling through streets, still obsessed with work deadlines and social expectations they can no longer understand. What makes Daybreak unique is that the outbreak isn't random. It's engineered destruction that accidentally creates opportunity. Teenagers inherit a broken world, but also gain the freedom to rebuild it without adult supervision. The virus becomes a metaphor for generational change, where the new guard literally can't adapt to new realities. Youth doesn't just survive the apocalypse, they transform it into something better by rejecting the systems that failed them. Canadian-French splatter comedy reimagines undead as commodified citizens rather than threats in this corporate satire from the Turbo Kid team. The living impaired become laborers, entertainers, and profit centers in a society that normalized death and monetized resurrection. RKSS delivers bloody humor with political commentary, adapted from the comic The Zombies That Ate the World. Critics noted tonal inconsistencies, but fans embraced the chaotic energy of a world where capitalism found a way to exploit even zombies. The Outbreak origin doesn't matter because it's already ancient history. The dead simply stopped staying dead, and society adapted by turning them into resources. Corporations discovered they could use zombies for dangerous jobs, cheap labor, and twisted entertainment, creating an economy built on the undead, which is crazy to think about. The lore treats infection as normalization rather than disaster, questioning what happens when profit motives override human dignity. Zombies became minimum wage workers, gladiator performers, and disposable assets in a system that values productivity over personhood. The real virus isn't biological, it's economic, spreading the idea that everything can be bought, sold, or exploited for profit. We Are Zombies uses horror comedy to expose how capitalism turns human suffering into a business opportunity, making the living just as disposable as the dead. This mobile hit started as a flash game where players drive through endless zombie hordes, earning cash to upgrade vehicles with bigger engines and spiked armor. The addictive loop makes it perfect for YouTube speedruns and TikTok showcases as players maximize their apocalypse rides. There's no complex lore because none is needed. Humanity has already fallen, and the roads are packed with corpses stretching to the horizon. The outbreak isn't explained because it doesn't have to be. Players join a world too far gone from origin stories or scientific explanations. Survival gets measured purely in distance travel, with each run pushing a little further through the wasteland. The virus exists only in the environment, creating endless zombie crowds that exist solely to be driven through at maximum speed. What makes Earn to Die brilliant is its simplicity. The infection already won, and now it's just about how far you can go before your vehicle gives out. The lore lives in the landscape itself, where abandoned cars and scattered bones tell the story of civilization's final traffic jam. Players don't fight the outbreak, they navigate its aftermath with horsepower and determination. The real horror isn't the zombies, it's the realization that sometimes survival just means keeping your engine running long enough to see what happens over the hill. The Flash game, Road of the Dead, is set in Evans City, Pennsylvania, where a military-engineered virus called S14 is accidentally unleashed, turning most of the population into aggressive zombies within just 7 days. S14 was originally developed as a bioweapon by the US military to quickly neutralize rogue cities or countries, but things spiraled out of control when the virus escaped containment. I feel like as soon as you start creating shit like this, karma is just waiting to bite you in the ass. As the outbreak spreads, the government quarantines the city and blocks all escape routes, forcing survivors to race through highways packed with undead and hostile military forces trying to prevent the infection from spreading beyond city limits. Like damn, the city gets cooked by the government and then they tell the people they can't leave. I'd be pissed as hell. Throughout the series, players encounter mutated zombies, increasingly desperate military tactics, including carpet bombings, and even nukes like this shit is Call of Duty, and hints at a possible failsafe virus S15 designed to counteract S14, though its effectiveness is never confirmed in-game. The chaos and destruction escalates in the sequels, with more locations, new zombie types, and deeper glimpses into the military's failed containment efforts. The lore is expanded with radio chatter, environmental storytelling, and cutscenes that reveal the panic, confusion, and moral uncertainty surrounding the outbreak and government response. Road of the Dead stands out for blending intense driving action with a dark cinematic narrative about a city's last hours under siege by its own creator's mistakes. SCP-049, also known as the Plague Doctor, is this creepy-ass humanoid entity that looks like a medieval plague doctor but with way more existential dread. The Foundation keeps him contained because this dude has an obsession with what he calls the pestilence, some disease that apparently only he can detect and that he's convinced is killing humanity. What's crazy is nobody else can actually sense this so-called pestilence, which makes you wonder if this guy is completely delusional or if we're all missing something terrifying. His touch is instantly lethal to humans, like straight up causes cardiac arrest on contact. And honestly, that's already sketchy as hell, but it gets worse, because after killing someone, SCP-049 performs this crude surgical procedure on the corpses, turning them into what the Foundation calls SCP-0492 instances, basically his personal zombie army. These aren't your typical shambling undead either. They're described as reanimated corpses that retain some basic motor functions and can follow simple commands from their creator. The zombies are aggressive towards anyone except SCP-049 himself. What's really unsettling is that SCP-049 genuinely believes he's curing people, talking about his works with this polite, intellectual demeanor while literally creating an undead horde. The guy speaks multiple languages, shows advanced medical knowledge, and acts all sophisticated while being a walking apocalypse scenario. The Foundation has to constantly terminate SCP-0492 instances because they keep trying to breach containment. 049 represents this perfect blend of body horror and psychological terror, a creature that's methodical, resilient, and utterly alien in his worldview, creating zombies not out of malice, but out of a twisted sense of medical duty that makes him somehow more terrifying than any mindless monster. The Last Stand Aftermath hits you with one of the most brutal premises in zombie gaming. You're not just fighting to survive, you're literally running against the clock because you're already infected and slowly turning into the thing you're trying to escape. The world has been absolutely cooked for 15 years at this point, with a zombie virus that started simply enough with your typical bite to infection spread, but then decided to get creative and start mutating. What's really messed up is that people who were once thought to be immune are now getting taken down by new strains, because apparently this virus is the overachiever of apocalyptic plagues and refuses to stay contained or predictable. The survivors who are left have barricaded themselves in this fortified compound called the End, which honestly sounds like the most depressing name for a safe house ever. But here's the kicker. If you get exposed to the virus, they straight up exile you. Like, thanks for keeping us safe all these years, now go die alone in the wasteland because we can't risk it. You're basically sent out as a walking dead man with a backpack and a prayer, scavenging for supplies while your body slowly betrays you and turns you into the enemy. The brilliance of this setup is that every single run you make is literally your last chance to matter, to find some piece of information or resource that might help the people who kicked you out. And honestly, that's both heroic and tragic as hell. You're racing against your own biology, trying to uncover clues about how this virus keeps evolving while battling increasingly dangerous zombie mutations that prove this plague is nowhere near done with humanity. It's this perfect storm of personal stakes and cosmic horror. You're not just fighting for survival anymore. You're fighting for meaning in your final hours, while the world around you continues to rot and adapt in ways that make recovery seem impossible. Arizona Sunshine throws you into the middle of a zombie apocalypse in the Arizona desert. The series puts you in the boots of a lone survivor who's got that perfect mix of desperation and dark humor that makes you think, this is probably how I'd cope with the world ending too. The Outbreak's origins is kept mysteriously vague, which is actually smart because sometimes the best horror doesn't need a detailed explanation. Sometimes shit just hits the fan and you gotta deal with it. You're wandering through abandoned towns and military outposts, following radio signals like some kind of apocalyptic treasure hunt. Except instead of gold, you're hoping to find literally any other living human being, because isolation in the zombie wasteland hits different when you're the only one cracking jokes. The first game ends with this intense last stand scenario, followed by a helicopter rescue. The sequel ups the ante by giving you a loyal dog companion, and let me tell you, nothing makes you more invested in survival than having a four-legged buddy counting on you. Plus, dogs are way better at detecting zombies than humans anyway. What makes this series stand out is that it's built exclusively for VR, so you're not just clicking to shoot, you're actually reaching for weapons, reloading manually, and physically ducking behind cover like your life depends on it. The immersive gunplay means every headshot feels satisfying, and every missed shot makes you panic in ways that traditional gaming just can't match. Vertigo Games really knew what they were doing when they designed this for VR. The co-op multiplayer lets you team up with friends, which is great because misery loves company, and zombie apocalypses are definitely more fun when you can laugh about near-death experiences with your buddies. Arizona Sunshine proves that sometimes the best zombie games don't need complex lore or deep mysteries. Sometimes you just need good gameplay, a solid atmosphere, and a protagonist who can make you laugh while the world burns around you. Recoil Zombies on Roblox takes the classic zombie outbreak formula and basically says screw it, we're not gonna hold your hand with a detailed backstory. And honestly, that's kind of refreshing in a world where every zombie game tries to explain every little detail about Patient Zero and government conspiracies. The setup is beautifully simple. A mysterious viral outbreak turned most people into zombies, and now you and your friends have to deal with the consequences like it's the worst group project ever assigned. What's genius about this approach is that it hot drops you straight into abandoned labs, ruined cities, and overrun military bases without spending 20 minutes explaining how Dr. Evil accidentally knocked over a test tube, because let's be real, do we really need another oops, we made a bioweapon story? We already had that covered for Agent 15 in Dead Rails. The environmental storytelling does all the heavy lifting with scattered warning signs and research notes that hint at some kind of failed containment effort, which is way more unsettling than having everything spelled out for you. The zombies keep evolving and getting tougher as you progress, which shows that this isn't just some basic virus that ran its course. This thing is actively adapting and getting smarter, which is terrifying when you think about it. The fact that you need to rely on teamwork and quick reflexes with your friends adds this layer of chaos where everyone's screaming at each other while trying to coordinate zombie slaying strategies like you're planning a military operation. What makes this work so well is that the open-ended lore lets you and your squad create your own horror stories about what caused the outbreak, turning every playthrough into a collaborative storytelling session where you're all just trying to survive whatever nightmare scenario you've imagined. Those Who Remain hits you with that classic Patient Zero scenario where one person basically f***ed over the entire human race by being in the wrong place at the wrong time, and now the rest of us have to deal with the consequences of their bad luck. The viral outbreak spreads through the usual suspects, bites and scratches, but what makes this one brutal is how it completely overwhelmed governments and collapsed infrastructure so fast that nobody had time to figure out what the hell was happening. The game drops hints through environmental storytelling and mission briefings that suggest this might have been an engineered virus that went rogue, which honestly makes it even worse because that means someone actually designed this nightmare on purpose. You're left scavenging for resources and fortifying safe zones while fighting off increasingly dangerous waves of undead, and every round reveals more depressing details about how civilization crumbled like a house of cards. What's really messed up is how the lore emphasizes that humanity's downfall wasn't just about the virus itself. It was about fear and panic tearing people apart from the inside, which is probably the most realistic part of any zombie apocalypse scenario. The abandoned quarantine zones and cryptic graffiti scattered around the map tells this story of desperation and failed containment efforts, painting a picture of a world where trust became a luxury nobody could afford. With every wave you survive, the sense of hopelessness just keeps growing, making every victory feel like you're just delaying the inevitable rather than actually making progress. The game captures that feeling of being a temporary survivor in a world that's already decided you don't belong. Fight of the Living Dead takes the absolutely insane premise of dropping YouTubers into a zombie apocalypse and somehow makes it work as both horror entertainment and social commentary on influencer culture. This YouTube original reality series revolves around the CONOP, a shadowy fictional organization that unleashes a biological weapon just to mess with the internet celebrities, because apparently even evil corporations know that watching famous people panic is peak entertainment. The virus reanimates the dead within hours, turning abandoned hospitals and luxury resorts into death traps where your favorite content creators from back in the day have to actually survive instead of just pretending for views and ad revenue. What makes this outbreak hilarious is how it strips away the YouTubers' carefully crafted online personas. This was early Jake Paul before his fight night days, Vitali before the international prison sentence, and Fuzi before the water fasting and crash out streams. The biological weapon doesn't discriminate between subscribers and haters, creating genuine fear in people who usually control their image completely through editing and multiple takes. You get to watch these normally composed creators lose their shit in real time as they're forced to complete dangerous missions, form alliances, and make tough decisions while avoiding zombie attacks and unexpected betrayal from their fellow influencers. YouTube Originals really took a chance with this concept, proving that even influencers can influence their way out of a viral apocalypse. And honestly, watching these digital stars realize they can't edit out the scary parts is hilariously satisfying. Outside takes the zombie outbreak formula and gives it that distinctly Filipino flavor of government incompetence mixed with family drama. Even the apocalypse can't escape bureaucratic stupidity. This horror series drops a family into the middle of a sudden zombie outbreak that sweeps across the Philippines, forcing them to flee to the countryside like they're escaping both the undead and their relatives at the same time. The show keeps the virus's origin mysteriously vague, but drops enough hints about government cover-ups and failed containment efforts to make you think someone in a lab coat definitely dropped the ball on this one. But at this point in the zombie series, are we even surprised? What makes this outbreak particularly brutal is how fast it spreads through bites, turning victims into aggressive zombies while society collapses overnight. The real horror isn't just the zombies though. It's watching how rumors and misinformation fuel paranoia until the human threat becomes just as dangerous as the undead, which honestly feels way too realistic for comfort. The found footage style adds this layer of urgency that makes you feel like you're right there with the family, sweating through every encounter and questioning whether that random person might be infected. Outside nails that feeling of not knowing who to trust when everyone could potentially be carrying the virus, turning every human interaction into a potential death sentence. Apocalypse Z, The Beginning of the End, introduces the TSJ virus, which is basically what happens when scientists decide to create the perfect bioweapon and then someone inevitably fucks up the containment protocols. This reminds me of how the virus in Days Gone got started. This genetically engineered nightmare spreads like wildfire and turns people into full-on rage zombies within minutes of exposure. The movie keeps the virus's creators mysterious, but drops enough hints that it was cooked up in a lab as a bioweapon, which means somewhere there's a scientist who's either dead or living with the knowledge that they helped end the world. Once the infection hits, it's game over for normal life as governments scramble to lock down cities, shut down airspaces, and blow up everyone's phone with emergency alerts that are basically saying we're all cooked and best of luck. The virus isn't airborne, thankfully, but one bite or scratch and you're toast, which means trust becomes a luxury nobody can afford, and everyone's constantly on edge around each other. Survivors like Manel have to dodge both the infected and the government's heavy-handed quarantine zones, which honestly just make everything messier because nothing says we've got this under control like shooting civilians and barricading entire cities. The movie captures that bleak but relatable feeling of watching society fall apart when a virus goes viral for real, hitting way too close to home for anyone who's lived through COVID lockdowns and doom scrolling. Love, Death, and Robots takes the zombie genre and basically says, hold my beer, while proceeding to reinvent undead horror in the most creative ways possible across its anthology episodes. The series explores multiple origins for zombie outbreaks, ranging from reckless scientific experimentation and government bioweapons gone wrong to supernatural curses and cosmic events that prove humanity eventually gets f***ed with. What's brilliant about this approach is how each episode feels like a completely different nightmare. Sometimes the zombies come from a lab accident, other times they're the result of ancient relics or technology running amok. And occasionally, there's just the universe's way of saying you've pushed too far. The show's lore is intentionally eclectic, using zombies as metaphors for everything from unchecked curiosity to the dangers of playing God with science. And honestly, it's refreshing to see a series that doesn't feel the need to stick to one boring origin story. The specific zombie episodes are a sped-up crash course of how a zombie virus starts small and balloons into a massive panic-driven breakdown and doom. The hilarious introduction with the couple getting freaky and my man's humping a statue that falls and creates a global pandemic was so realistic in what I could see us doing in real time. I couldn't help but laugh. From how the city becomes overrun and people begin to literally run each other over, up to the president getting closed in at the White House and going full Rambo mode, spamming a machine gun and launching nukes. The episode accurately depicts how this would all unfold down to the T, all under 3 minutes. The creative freedom of the episodes shows you never know if you're getting a tragic human drama or an absurd cosmic joke, but it's always thought-provoking and usually leaves you questioning humanity's life choices. Love, Death, and Robots proves that zombie stories work best when you're willing to experiment with the formula instead of just recycling the same old virus escapes from the lab bullshit. Alive transforms the zombie apocalypse into a claustrophobic nightmare by trapping young gamer Oh Jong-woo in his family's high-rise apartment where Seoul falls to a mysterious infection, highlighting that sometimes the worst prison is your own home. The film strips away typical zombie movie tropes of group dynamics and mobile survival, instead focusing on one person's slow mental deterioration during extended isolation, which honestly hits different after we've all experienced our own version of lockdowns. Jong-woo's connection to the outside world comes through social media, gaming streams, and drone footage, creating this uniquely modern take on apocalyptic storytelling that reflects our digital age anxieties about being connected but completely alone. The zombies are fast, aggressive, and drawn to sound, but the real horror comes from watching the protagonist slowly lose his sanity while rationing dwindling food supplies and realizing that all his gaming skills don't mean shit when the apocalypse is real. When he eventually makes contact with another survivor across the courtyard, their relationship becomes a lifeline that drives the film's emotional core, because apparently, even during the end of the world, human connection is what keeps us from completely losing our shit. The infection's origin remains deliberately mysterious, allowing the focus to stay on intimate human drama rather than scientific explanations, which makes the whole experience feel more personal and terrifying. Alive highlights that sometimes the most effective zombie stories aren't about fighting hordes of undead, but about fighting the urge to give up when you're completely alone. Block Z takes the zombie outbreak to a Filipino university where a deadly virus spreads through bites and turns students into fast-moving monsters, but throws in the twist that survivor PJ discovers she's completely immune after getting bitten, which is either the best or worst luck possible depending on how you look at it. The virus acts like rabies on steroids and spreads so fast that the military seals off the entire campus, shooting anyone who tries to escape, and basically turns the university into a death trap where students have to use their medical knowledge to fight off their former classmates and teachers. These infected move with scary speed and violence, making every encounter feel like a final exam where the wrong answer gets you eaten alive. And honestly, that's probably still less stressful than actual college finals. The university setting becomes the perfect nightmare location because students live together in dorms, eat together in cafeterias, and attend classes in packed rooms where one bite can start a chain reaction faster than gossip. What makes Block Z unique is how it blends real medical science with Filipino culture, showing how local beliefs and traditions clash with the unstoppable spread of the virus in ways that feel authentic and terrifying. PJ's immunity might be the key to stopping the virus, but she has to watch her friends transform into the same creatures that are trying to eat her alive, raising questions about sacrifice, hope, and what it means to survive when your whole world turns against you and everyone you care about becomes your enemy.